Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes of public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness Initiative. This episode is sponsored by the Finest Service Organization, a provider of line of duty death loan protection through many of our POCUA institutions. I'm your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, Ken Bader, and this is part 2 of Within the Trenches with Ricardo Martinez II. I hear you on the fatigue just from a vicarious standpoint. I've never done your job, so I can only look at it from a vicarious standpoint. But I would think, and please comment on this, it seems as though over the last decade or so, maybe give or take, 911 professionals have been raised up to the level of other public safety professionals. Even the civilian workers, employees of police departments, fire departments, and so forth, at one time they were kind of thought of as lesser. But a lot of places I see now, it's like, hey, you're part of the team just like everybody else. You know, maybe you're not running into burning buildings or fixing broken bones, you know, out on the middle of the street or shooting at bad guys. But, you know, you're dealing with things that everybody else is dealing with as well. And we wouldn't be able to do it. I think that same thought has gone to 911 professionals, and that, you know, you may not be out there in the danger, but you're listening to the danger, and mentally you're getting bombarded with this every single day. Are you finding that as well, that the respect, for lack of a better way of putting it, for 911 operators has gone up considerably over the last number of years?
Yeah, definitely. It has changed because you know, there's definitely been a big awakening, if you will, on what it is that, you know, 911 dispatchers and call takers go through. Like I've said, on a daily basis, the calls. I've always said that taking a 911 call, at least for me, and I remember thinking this in my head, was taking a 911 call sometimes, especially if it's a high priority one, is like getting into a car, slamming on the gas, and letting go of the steering wheel, because it can be chaotic, and there's so much that's going on. You know, some of those you could almost even compare to an accident, because the amount of impact that it can have on you right off the bat and later on. It can be severe or it could be minor, but a lot of those calls stick with you. I have a number of calls that stick with me that even, you know, now, you know, I've been out of dispatch for, I think I'm going on 8 years now. This July will be 8 years that I've been out of dispatch. But a lot of those calls, depending on certain things that I see, are still kind of a trigger sometimes. And, you know, I love true crime as well. So when the 911 calls play, depending on what it is, like if it's a domestic one, I'll start to slip back and think about some of the calls I took. I'm like, damn. And, you know, so some of those stick with me, but with, you know, a lot of information that's going out as well, you know, podcasts, shows, whichever, they're really highlighting what 911 dispatchers and call takers do. And that respect is definitely the respect and recognition, and saying, yeah, you know, you all are part of the team. You know, we always have been, really. It just wasn't out there enough for people to really recognize the amount of work that goes into this job.
Yeah, thinking as somebody who's never been in public safety, but obviously has worked with a number of public safety professionals and has the utmost respect for the job. Everybody does. It seems like everybody has a different type of stress and danger. Obviously, you know, a police officer going into a domestic situation, the danger is really high. But if you could diffuse that, you know, now you have downtime. You've diffused it. Everybody's okay. We're getting back in the car. You know, maybe we've got, you know, as much as 15 minutes, half hour or more if it's a slow night of downtime. But you may have a domestic call, finish with that call, and then have another call to deal with that's just as harsh or even worse without any downtime in between.
Yeah, that has happened a lot. You know, one time someone asked me what it's like to take a call. And I gave him the example of it being completely busy to where you're the one who's got to juggle between different calls. The first call that comes in is a personal injury accident. You've got help going out there, but you've got one of the people that's there. You've got that call. You have to put them on hold to take another call. This call is domestic. This domestic is verbal only. There's no weapons or anything. Another call is coming in, and it's that busy that you have to put them on hold as well. After making sure they're separated, there's nothing else going on, you put them on hold. Well, now you got a call where it's a medical and it's CPR. You've already got help that's going out to that accident. So that one is basically, you can let it go because they're going to hang up already, right? But you've got that domestic that's there. These people are doing on the medical that you're taking at that time, textbook CPR. There's a certain amount of compressions that they're going to do where you have just that little bit of time to put them on hold and get back, because EMS is right headed that way. You go back to the domestic to make sure that everything is good because officers are heading out there. You pick up the phone, ask them if everything is okay. Well, now this has got a weapon involved.
Yeah.
So I asked the person, I was like, who do you stay with? The CPR one or the call where the domestic is now in progress, even more so with a weapon involved?
Yeah. I would think
EMS
the
is already
domestic,
going to get out
but
there.
Yeah.
Yes, the domestic. Yeah, the domestic. You stay with the domestic because now you got to let the officers know, hey, there's a weapon involved and you're trying to do what you can to get this person who's on the phone to safety until the officers get out there, because the other one's already doing textbook CPR. EMS is probably almost there as it is. They're going to get the help that they need. So that's what we're doing. You're thinking on your feet and you're triaging all these calls at the same time. And it is sometimes chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because having worked with a number of police officers over the last almost 2 decades now, they'll tell me that they say the same thing or similar things that you're saying about domestic calls. Is give me an armed robbery any day. They'll say those are straightforward. They want money and they want to get away, and we know exactly what's going on there. We have no idea what we're going to deal with in a domestic situation, and it's interesting that you're echoing that to a certain extent from the 911 call perspective.
Yeah, and just even from that standpoint as well, going on, like any other calls, like things can happen or they can change on the fly. And we were talking earlier about getting all this information and everything else. I took a call once. This was actually towards the end of my dispatching career. It was the last week. It seemed like the dispatch gods were sending me every shit call to say, hey,
you're retiring from this job soon. Here, you're getting everything.
Exactly. Yeah, man, that's the way it seemed. And one of those calls started out as a disorderly. It was a disorderly person who had shown up to the house. The caller was like, yeah, he's not here anymore. He showed up. He was throwing things around. He was upset, this and that. And at the very end of the call, she says, I think he's suicidal as well. And I thought, you couldn't, okay. Like, yeah, because that changes everything. Yeah. So then, I had the person's phone number, the vehicle description, all of that information, right? And I hang up with her. I put it in the narrative, but also yell it over at the same time to the person on radios. It's possible that the guy that we're looking for is suicidal. Get it out there to them, tone it. And I tried calling this person because maybe I can get a hold of him, right? I'm calling, it's ringing, but it's so busy during that time, I have to hang up so that I can get the next call. I get the next call, and there's a guy who says, I just saw a car go directly into a tree. And I asked him his location. So he gives me the location, and I immediately look at the map to see how far it is from the house. And it's not that far. So I ask him what the vehicle description is and if he can safely check on the person. And he goes, sir, I don't think there's any way that this person lived. Like, I watched him go directly at full speed into that tree. When he gave me the vehicle description, I remember like kind of lipping the vehicle description because I could feel it. I just knew it. And it was a blue Toyota Tercel. And I just kind of sat there and I typed over and I yelled over. I said, I think this is my guy. Send him over there. And sure enough, it was.
Yeah.
It was that person. But that there was enough impact on that call that when I was done with it, I had my closure and everything, right? Something that dispatchers and call takers don't usually get is closure.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that this had happened. I knew the outcome. But for me, I started to question if I would have had a different line of questioning, if I would have done this or that. Is there any way I could have maybe gotten a hold of him? So I took like 20 minutes looking at the map, trying to map out the location and going through my line of questioning. And then finally, I just realized, no, there was nothing I could have done. That person had was already going into that tree as I was trying to call them. There was nothing I could have done. But that was one of those things, man. Like, you take these calls sometimes and you start to think, is there anything that I could have done? Like, could I have impacted or affected this any other way? And sometimes it sticks with you. But that's one of those.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I can only imagine. My wife works in healthcare, and she's not patient facing, but given the organization that she works with, it doesn't happen often, but on a more regular basis than it should. There are suicidal calls that happen. They start as customer service, and then eventually they sometimes de-escalate to a suicide call. And she's one of the point people that take those, that step in and have to talk and say, all right, how serious is this? And then they have their protocol, and police gets called right away and so forth. But, I can only imagine what it's like to be on one of those calls.
Now a word from our sponsor, the Police Officers Credit Union Association. The POCUA can suggest a credit union that serves public safety professionals in practically every state in the country. One state we definitely have covered is Colorado. Rocky Mountain Law Enforcement Federal Credit Union has been serving members of Colorado law enforcement and their families since 1938. They're more than a bank. They're a community united by the thin blue line. For more information about Rocky Mountain Law Enforcement Federal Credit Union, go to www.rmlefcu.org or call 303-458-6660. To find an institution to serve you in any of the other 49 states, go to policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't banking with a POCUA credit union, you're just working with an institution that just so happens to serve public safety professionals, and you deserve better.
What's the strangest, maybe the funniest, goofiest, even most terrible, I guess, 911 call either you took or heard about through your podcast?
So the strangest one that I can think of, and this is definitely through the podcast. So I have, and we'll kind of get into this here in a little bit when we talk about the movement and all, but what came from the movement as well is a session that I do at different conferences called Imagine Listening. And so it's Imagine Listening. The tagline is "Your worst days are every day." And what Imagine Listening is I have dispatchers come in and they share their own personal IM 911 stories. That's for 30 minutes. That can be, it is emotionally intense. It's pretty much like a peer support type session where they're sharing these hard stories. And if they can't share it out loud, they write it down and I read it for them. So it's really, cathartic and everything, therapeutic for people to be able to do that. Again, it's only for the first 30 minutes. The last 30 minutes is called open mic. And we share our funny 911 stories. So we start out, with the emotional stuff, and then we end laughing because I don't want anybody to leave from there feeling, like really drained. Instead, I want them to feel happy. So we share these stories. So I was in Wisconsin and I was doing this session, and one of the stories that came in for the open mic part, it was interesting because it's the funny part, but the person who's telling the story starts out with, I took this call from this guy, and he says, my friend is not breathing. My friend's not breathing, and but the way the person is telling the story is real animated. So of course we're kind of chuckling, but it's that kind of chuckle where you're like, should we be laughing at this? Like, what is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And then the person telling the story says, the caller then says, it's my baby's not breathing. And then I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have to edit this because the open mic and Imagine Listening are also actually episodes that I use on the podcast for others to hear and to learn from. So I was thinking this isn't going to make the cut because I don't know what's going to happen here. So the person's telling us about this call, how it's a CPR call. She's telling this guy how to do CPR on his baby. There's an officer that's headed out there, and the person telling the story is kind of swearing and stuff, again being kind of animated on how the person is talking to her. And then an officer gets out there and says, Central, stop everyone, hold everyone. And the person telling the story says, all I can think of is, what the heck, why are they stopping? This baby's not breathing. This person's baby's not breathing. And then the officer gets on the radio and says, Central, it's an iguana. It's an iguana. and then the whole, because you can hear the person telling the story, and you could hear a pin drop in back of that person who's telling the story, because we're all at the edge of our seats like, what exactly is going on here? Why is this part of the funny part? And then it gets to that part, and then everyone starts laughing. And the dispatcher says, yeah, I'm taking, this call. And then he says it's iguana. So this whole time I'm telling this guy how to give CPR on his iguana. This was his baby. This was his friend. Yeah. And we're all like, well, did the iguana make it? And the dispatcher's like, no, the iguana didn't make it. But, that's what it ended up being, was that, I thought we were giving CPR on this person's baby, but it was an iguana.
Well, did you tell that person maybe if you had done a better job of explaining the CPR, the iguana would have lived?
The iguana was gone.
The iguana was probably cold at that point.
Yeah, the iguana, I guess the iguana had been gone already. Yeah, no, the dispatcher was doing it textbook style and like trying to get everyone there as fast as possible. And then, because, when these calls come in, no matter what it is, we got to take it at its highest priority. Sometimes you've got people who are calling in, also those that are like frequent callers that call in that are just kind of having, emotional or mental issues or whatever. It'll be that one time that you don't, might not take it seriously, and it's something that's really happening. So yeah, the person telling the story was very direct and everything on what they were doing, but also not understanding the person who was calling in, because some of the stuff, there's a little more to the story, but I can't think of all the pieces. But that was the main thing, was that it was an iguana. But yeah, strange things like that. Another Imagine Listening open mic session was, it was a dispatcher who was in training and was helping a person. They were delivering their baby, and the only person there to help them was a cousin, and was giving the instructions. And because the cousin's like, I can see it hanging out of her. And he ends up giving, the phone to the person who is in labor. The dispatcher she's asking, the mom to be, just lay down. I need your cousin to look and see, further. And she's like, no, he's my cousin. I'm not going to let him look at me down there. And she's like, I know. She's like, but we need to do this. And so EMS ends up getting out there. She is so excited that she's going to get a stork pin, because, a lot of dispatch centers do that. If you help deliver a child over the phone, you're part of like the stork club and you get one of those pins. Well, the supervisor ends up calling to check on the baby, and it turns out that what it was the placenta is what was coming out, not the baby. And so the dispatcher starts laughing, and she goes, so I didn't get a pin because they don't give out a placenta pin. And that one was out of North Carolina. It was the funniest thing, because she just kept saying, I didn't get a pin. They don't give out placenta pins. So, I got screwed on that call because they don't give one out.
Yeah, I think they should have like, I mean, come on, you're taking the call, give the woman a damn stork pin. But anyhow, that's just me. As we wrap up here, I definitely want to talk about the I Am 911 movement. You're the
Mhm.
founder of that. Tell our audience a little bit about how that got started
Sure.
and what that's all about.
Yeah. So 2016, back in August, they're both there are two big 911 organizations, and they were both trying to get 911 dispatchers and call takers reclassified. Because right now, the Office of Management and Budget, the classification for dispatchers and call takers falls under the clerical class. So we're under there, with administrative assistants and all of that. So they were trying to reclassify to be added to the protective class with all of public safety, because there are other things that end up coming with that, not just recognition, but also later on, there could be things with salary or
Sure.
retirement, or even training funds, all different types of things. So they were trying to do that. From what I saw, there wasn't a lot of awareness that was being brought out. They were putting out some different things. I'd been telling stories already for a long time, so I thought, why not insert myself
Sure.
into this battle? So what I wanted to do was I wanted to give a raw look into what it's like to take a phone call, and but a glimpse and a raw look. So I created a meme. It was just a little piece of a call that I had taken, and the meme, it's midnight, or it's nighttime, and there's a full moon, and on it it says, "I heard your last breath the night you flipped your four-wheeler," and then underneath, hashtag I am 911. And I did it that way almost as another form of communication, because I'm probably never going to meet those people that I spoke to that night. But if they were ever to see that, it's like me saying, I was there with you. That night, I was there with you. I took that
Yeah.
call. I was there throughout that entire call with you. And I asked dispatchers to do the same thing, to raise awareness for this reclassification, but it quickly turned into peer support as well. So dispatchers started sharing all of these stories. So this was August 24th, 2016. That weekend, hashtag I am 911 was trending at number 3 on Twitter.
Wow.
Um, the um, the whole engagement during that time when I had started this, it ended up hitting like 40 million on Facebook, and it spread. So in the UK, they were sharing stories for I am 999, Australia I am 00, and New Zealand I am 111. It was like the entire thin gold line. All these
Yeah.
dispatchers and call takers came together and were sharing all of these stories. And even to date, we're still answering and sharing stories from September of 2016, because that's how many of those stories came in. So it's a form of peer support, but it's also it was a way to raise awareness for that reclassification.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. It actually sounds like we need to come up with a whole new episode just on the I am 911 movement. But that's incredible. I'm really pleased. And please isn't the strong enough word to have you talk about the thin gold line.
Mhm.
We talk a lot about the thin blue line in the POCUA, and obviously the thin red line for our firefighters. But I don't think we talk enough about the thin gold line and how that is just, if you see those flags, and most of the audience know exactly what I'm talking about, yeah, you don't discount that color and that line on that flag, because it's just as important as the other ones out there.
For sure.
So, well, on that note, before I start getting emotional over here, and I didn't even do your job, and it's starting to hit me. Yeah, most important question is, how can the audience find you? How can they find Within the Trenches? How can they find any information on the I Am 911 movement, or anything else that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So you can go to withinthetrenches.net, and actually, another page that I built on there. It's withinthetrenches.net/biz card, and
Okay.
that's BIZ card. That will take you to all of my links. They're all listed there, because you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube, social media. I do live broadcasts on every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern time, open mic, where dispatchers come on and they share all their funny stories in the comments, and I read them out loud, and it gets crazy sometimes. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm doing, especially Within the Trenches Media, doing virtual events as well. COVID stopped a lot of the conferences. So I ended up coming out with the Dare to Be Great conference, and I've been doing virtual conferences ever since. So, but that one, withintrenches.net/bizcard, will take you to everything.
Perfect.
Thank you for having me on, man. This was good.
Hey, no problem. Hey, it was great having you on. It was my pleasure. We probably could easily go for another half hour to an hour, but you got other stuff to do. But I reserve the right to bring you back at any time.
I'm all about it.
And did I earn the right to call you Rich or Richie, or do I have to stay with the Ricardo?
Dude, you can call me Rich or Richie. It's all good.
Well, Rich, Richie, Ricardo, whomever you would like to identify with in terms of a name. Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. It was really insightful.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. And thank you to all of you who have either watched or listened to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio. And we will be back with you next week with another great guest.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.